Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corin. So we were chatting in a few episodes lately about some, I thought, really interesting stuff to do with digital forensics and everything related to evidence gathering, like in one-party consent jurisdictions like Israel, using a digital voice recorder to record high-stakes meetings, like the ones you might have with a landlord inspecting the property, where you might have good grounds to believe that the landlord might act in bad faith or say something that he later denies saying. And you described it, Corin described it actually, as empowering. And thank you, Corin, because that's exactly how I feel about it. I'm aware that it represents an intrusion on privacy. It's not something I would do very lightly, but I think in certain circumstances, it really is a vital protection that it's good that it is legally enshrined as a right. But you mentioned that there is it's not, I mean, it depends really, I guess, on the evidentiary standards to which you are being held. And I mentioned that I studied law. That was my undergraduate degree. And I remember a little bit about the laws of evidence are quite specific. But most of our coursework way back then was talking about evidence in terms of what's admissible. And we didn't really get into digital evidence at all, from what I can recall, and its admissibility. And it's a very specialized field. If you start looking for audio and video, you'll find audio and video forensics, people that you'll find apps that just their entire purpose, like ProofMode, which I highly recommend, tremendous app from the Guardian project. It's to certify that photos and videos are real, and likewise for audio. And you've got another tool I like is called EEVID for certifying emails. And contrary to what a lot of people think, generally in jurisdictions, especially here in Israel, emails and WhatsApp messages can be admissible evidence, but you have to ideally know what you're doing in recording them. So you've got the recording and collection aspect, and the second one is something called the chain of custody, which is what I'd love to talk about today. When I was looking through this recently, I came across some really interesting products, and unfortunately the name escapes me. I'm synthesizing too much information at the moment. But you've got apps like ProofMode, but you've also got these camera apps. I found at least 3, if not 4, that they're hardware cameras, and they will not only do all the checksum stuff that we talked about in how ProofMode does and other apps like it, and best standards in evidence gathering, but it's a standalone hardware product, so it's kind of tamper-proof. There's no other way to. That's part of the chain of custody. And ultimately, when we're talking about chain of custody, we're talking about bringing digital evidence to a court of law and then presenting it in evidence. And that's kind of the end of the chain. And if the chain breaks, if you don't do something right or not by the book, and again, the evidentiary standards are going to differ substantially from something in small claims and something at maybe the high court level where the litigants might be, professional prosecutors. But at that more exacting level of standard, if the chain of custody is shown to have broken, then that can basically make the evidence inadmissible. So coming back to the more ground level topic here of tenancy and landlord disputes, which is really the province of, small claims and maybe magistrates at best. What are some things that one could do if they were gathering evidence? You're using your collection devices. You're using whether it's one of these things. And by the way, very relevant to our discussions about AI, because the pitch for all these hardware collectors is actually, in the era of AI, anyone can generate anything. So this is a camera that creates photos that cannot be disproven to be reality. So there's definitely, it's actually, from what I can tell, it's substantially growing. It's growing in importance, this area. It might have seemed like a very niche idea a few years ago, proving reality. Now that's becoming quite front and center. So I expect we're going to hear a lot more about these cameras over the course of time. But Herman and Corin, what can one do regardless of what gear you're using, whether it's one of these tools or you're using your phone, and let's say, and you want to adhere, what does that mean exactly, the chain of custody in this case? And what would you advise someone? Let's get practical. Something you'll come across in this area is called worm. Write once, read many times, worm media. And one of the recommendations I've seen, if you're storing your evidence in the cloud in something like S3, is to use versioning or use a worm bucket, because that essentially is a way of verifying that what you upload to the bucket was never tampered. It can actually be certified, I think, right? And that would actually be a great subtopic here, is certifiable tamper-free cloud storage. Bit of a mouthful, but not the kind of conventional cloud storage you're going to be uploading your holiday photos into, but a specific cloud storage used for digital forensics, where you're uploading something and then can verify, if needed in a court of law, that the downloaded file from which the evidence was produced, that's generally how this works. We can talk about case bundles, which is usually a zip file, but sometimes according to a very specific format with metadata, that these exist. And it's a whole industry that I was unaware of until about a week ago, and I'd love to learn more about. Herman and Corin, let's talk about digital forensics today and proving a chain of custody.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corin, and I am joined as always by my brother,
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is a beautiful day here in Jerusalem, even if the air is a bit crisp.
It really is. And you know, living here with our housemate Daniel, we get into some pretty deep conversations over coffee. He actually sent us a fascinating audio prompt this morning that got me thinking about the line between privacy and protection.
Oh, I heard it. Daniel was diving into the world of digital forensics and the legal side of recording high-stakes meetings. It is a topic that feels more relevant every single day, especially with how good generative media has become lately.
Exactly. He was talking specifically about the legal landscape here in Israel, where one-party consent for recording is the standard, but he pushed it further than just hitting record on a phone. He wanted to know about the chain of custody, tamper-proof hardware, and this concept of WORM media.
It is a brilliant rabbit hole. Most people think that just having a recording is enough to win a case, but in 2026, the bar for evidence is so much higher. If you cannot prove the file has not been touched from the second it was created until the second it hits the courtroom, you are in trouble.
Right, and that is what we are tackling today. This is episode 283, and we are going deep into the mechanics of digital truth. How do you gather evidence that actually holds up when someone claims it is a deepfake or a manipulated file?
I love this. It connects so well to what we talked about last week in episode 282 regarding surveillance tech, but this is the defensive side. This is about the average person protecting themselves against bad actors, like a landlord acting in bad faith.
So let us start with the basics of that legal context. In a one-party consent jurisdiction like Israel, you can record a conversation you are a part of without telling the other person. But Herman, I heard there were some recent changes to the privacy laws here.
You have a sharp ear, Corn. Amendment 13 to the Privacy Protection Law went into effect last year in January of 2025. While it did not scrap the one-party consent rule for recordings, it significantly ramped up the requirements for how you handle and store that data, especially if it contains sensitive information. Admissibility is now a much steeper hurdle.
Which brings us to the chain of custody. Daniel mentioned this in his prompt. Can you break down what that actually looks like in a digital sense?
Think of the chain of custody like a baton in a relay race. You need to be able to show exactly who had that baton at every single moment. In digital forensics, the chain of custody starts at the moment of capture. You need to document the device used, the software version, the exact time, and most importantly, the cryptographic hash of the file the moment it was finished.
A cryptographic hash. We've touched on this before, but for anyone who missed those episodes, that is basically a digital fingerprint, right?
Precisely. Usually, we use an algorithm like SHA-256. It takes a file and turns it into a fixed string of characters. If you change even one single bit in that audio file, the hash will look completely different. So, if you record a meeting with your landlord and immediately generate a hash, you can prove later that the file you are showing the court is the exact same one you recorded.
But here is the problem I see. If I record it on my phone, and then 5 minutes later I run a hash, the opposition could argue that I had 5 minutes to run it through an AI voice changer. How do we close that gap?
That is where the specialized tools Daniel mentioned come in. Tools like ProofMode, which comes from the Guardian project. ProofMode is fascinating because it does not just record the audio. It captures a massive amount of metadata at the same time. GPS coordinates, cell tower IDs, and even sensor data from the phone's accelerometer.
Wait, why would you need the accelerometer data for an audio recording?
Because it proves the phone was actually in your hand or on a table at that location. It makes it nearly impossible to claim the audio was fabricated in a studio later. ProofMode bundles all that into a cryptographically signed zip file. It uses the C2PA standard that stands for the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. It creates a digital seal of authenticity the very millisecond the recording stops.
That is incredible. It is like bagging and tagging evidence at a crime scene, but the phone does it automatically. I remember we discussed something similar in episode 151, but applying it to a landlord dispute is a very practical, real-world use case.
It really is. And Daniel also mentioned hardware cameras. This is huge right now. Sony and Leica have fully integrated content credentials into their latest bodies, like the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II and the Alpha 9 Mark III. They even use three-dimensional depth information from the sensor to prove the camera was looking at a real physical person and not just a high-resolution screen.
I imagine that is going to be the standard for all journalism and legal work soon. If you do not have a signed file, it will be assumed to be AI generated.
I think you are right. We are moving into a post-truth era where the default assumption is that everything is fake. The only way to prove reality is through these cryptographic anchors.
So, let us talk about WORM media. Daniel asked about this specifically. Write once, read many. Is that still a thing in the age of the cloud?
It is actually more important now than ever. In a professional forensics context, the real power is in WORM compliant cloud storage. Amazon Web Services has a feature called S3 Object Lock.
How does that work? If it is in the cloud, surely an administrator could just delete it.
Not in compliance mode. When you put a file into an S3 bucket with Object Lock in compliance mode, even the root administrator of the account cannot delete or modify that file until the retention period expires. You could set it for 5 years, and for those 5 years, that file is effectively carved in stone. Not even a hacker who steals your credentials can get rid of it.
That is a powerful piece of the chain of custody. If you record an interaction using ProofMode, and it immediately uploads to a WORM configured cloud bucket, you have a perfect, untamperable record. You can tell a judge, look, this was recorded at 10:15 a.m. It was signed by my device, and it was locked in this cloud storage by 10:16 a.m. There was no window of opportunity for me to manipulate it.
Exactly. You are removing the human element of trust and replacing it with mathematical certainty. For someone in a high-stakes situation, like a tenant facing an illegal eviction, that kind of evidence is a shield.
I want to push on the privacy aspect for a second, though. Daniel mentioned that this impacts privacy. Even if it is legal, there is a social cost to this, right?
It is a difficult balance, Korn. On one hand, you have the right to protect yourself from lies and gaslighting. On the other, you have the chilling effect where people are afraid to speak freely. But in the context Daniel brought up, a landlord-tenant meeting, there is a power imbalance. Usually, the person with more power has less to fear from the truth. These tools level the playing field.
That is a fair point. It is less about spying and more about creating an objective record. But what about the technical hurdles? If I'm a regular person, how do I actually set up a certifiable, tamper-free cloud storage?
It is getting easier. There are services now that act as an intermediary. You use their app, and they handle the back-end WORM storage and hashing. But if you want to be truly DIY, you can set up an AWS account, create a bucket with Object Lock enabled, and use an API to push your files there. It takes about an afternoon of tinkering.
I think that is a great practical takeaway for our listeners. If you are entering a situation where you think you might need legal protection, do not just rely on your voice memo app. Take the time to look into something like ProofMode. It is free, it is open source, and it provides that extra layer of metadata that makes your evidence much harder to dismiss.
And if you are really serious, look into EEVID for emails. Daniel mentioned that one too. It stands for Evidence Certified Email. It basically acts as a digital registered letter. It tracks when the email was sent, when it was opened, and it provides a certified PDF that proves the content of the message. They even offer a 5-year storage guarantee for your receipts.
It is amazing how much of our lives are now lived in these digital spaces where we have to constantly prove we are telling the truth. I remember back in episode 279, we talked about private intelligence and how they use these same tools to verify their sources. It is the same tech, just scaled down for personal use.
It really is. The world is getting more complex, and the tools to navigate it are getting more sophisticated. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to that one concept, the chain of custody. If you can show the path of the data, you can show the truth of the event.
You know, I was reading a paper recently about the second-order effects of this kind of ubiquitous recording. One of the points they made was that it might actually lead to more honest behavior in professional settings. If a landlord knows that there is a high probability that a meeting is being recorded with tamper-proof technology, they are much less likely to make illegal threats.
It is the Hawthorne effect, right? People change their behavior when they know they are being observed. In this case, it is a forced accountability. I think it is a net positive for society, even if it feels a bit dystopian at first glance. We are moving from a world of reputation-based trust to a world of verification-based trust.
Trust, but verify. The old saying has never been more literal. Now, Herman, let us get into the weeds of the WORM media again. You mentioned compliance mode versus governance mode. What is the difference there?
Oh, it is a huge distinction. Governance mode is like a soft lock. It prevents most users from deleting a file, but someone with special permissions, like a senior administrator, can still override it. This is useful for corporate settings where you might need to fix a mistake, but for legal evidence, you want compliance mode. In compliance mode, nobody can override the lock, not even the person who created the account, not even Amazon's support staff. Once that file is in there, it is stuck until the timer runs out.
That is the key, isn't it? To make the evidence admissible, you have to prove that even you, the person presenting it, could not have changed it. It removes the bias.
Exactly. A judge looks at that and sees a system where the user has intentionally given up control to preserve the integrity of the record. That carries a lot of weight.
So, if someone is listening to this and they are in a dispute right now, what are the 3 most practical steps they can take today?
Step 1. Download ProofMode. It is available for Android and iPhone. Start using it for any interaction that feels high stakes. Step 2. If you are communicating via email, use a service like EEVID to get a certified delivery receipt. And Step 3. If you can, set up a simple WORM-enabled cloud bucket. If that feels too technical, at the very least, send a hash of your recording to a third party or use a blockchain-based timestamping service to create a public receipt of your evidence.
This has been a really enlightening discussion. I think Daniel really hit on something important here. It is not just about the tech, it is about the shift in how we handle truth and accountability in our daily lives.
It really is, and I am glad he sent it in. It is always fun to nerd out on the intersection of law and technology, especially when it has such a direct impact on how we live here in Jerusalem.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. From the legalities of one-party consent to the cryptographic nuances of WORM storage. If you found this useful, or if you have your own weird prompts you want us to explore, please get in touch at myweirdprompts.com.
And while you are there, you can check out all our past episodes. We love seeing the feedback from our regular listeners. It makes those late-night research sessions worth it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a wrap for today. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt, and thanks to all of you for listening. Until next time, stay curious and keep verifying.
Take care, everyone. See you in episode 284.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.